books, and I have to take this off, she said, since I'm talking to you.
Yes.
I'm a retired school teacher. I taught history for years. You can turn that on if you want.
It is on, so
Okay.
let's see.
She kind of wants me to talk up close to it, but I think you can hear me, can't you?
Yes.
Yeah. I'm a retired school teacher from Taylorville, Illinois, and Lovington and Sullivan, all sorts of places up north. And when I was getting my master's degree back in 1980s, this guy up here, Colin Davis, liked the way I had done oral history interviews. So he asked me if I would help this other guy, Carl Omlinger, write or do interviews of coal miners from Illinois, so Carl could write a book, which he did, called Divided Kingdom. And it was published in 1991, and I interviewed 44 coal miners and their families. And it was really neat because they were wonderful people, and they were all mostly in their 80s and 90s, and they had lived all the way back then from 1898 or so till the 80s when they were there. And I used to tell my students these stories of Charlie Berger and the Sheldon gang, and up north we had coal mine wars. We had gunfights in Taylorville and all through Christian County, 36 unsolved murders in the 1930s. And I would tell the kids in my history class these stories that happened just a few blocks from where they lived. And they said, Mr. Corley, that couldn't have happened. If it did, it would be a book or a movie. So when I retired, I wrote the book 16 Tons. And I gave it to all my students for free on Microsoft Word. I emailed it to them and family and things, and they emailed it to people and other people. And finally, one day, this guy, Tim Sheard, got hold of it, and he asked me if he could publish it. So I didn't even go out looking for a publisher. He lives in Brooklyn, and he had me come out there after he had it published within 4 months. And that's why some people say, well, it's not edited well. It's edited pretty good, but it's not perfect because he rushed into publication. He thought we were going to win a Pulitzer Prize or something, he said. But he had me come out there to New York and Washington, D.C., and I went and spoke at the AFL-CIO to the late Richard Trumka, who just passed away, and Cecil Roberts, and they liked the book. So the story, 16 Tons, talks about 1898 to 1933, and everything that happened that's centered around Christian County. And I found out that all these incredible stories and adventures had come from Colorado, where they had the Ludlow Massacre, from West Virginia, where they had Matewan, where Sid Hatfield fought it out with a bunch of coal company guards. And those people were not able to get the United Mine Workers there. So they moved to Illinois because we had the United Mine Workers. All right? And we had better wages and better work conditions. So that's what 16 Ton tells. It's these stories of Pana and Verdun. You might have heard of the Verdun Massacre, although we had bigger ones in Pana in Christian County, and Carterville. Well, I started my book, 16 Tons, with those stories, and then it goes on all the way to 1933, and it was already 110,000 words, and Tim said, well, I said, I'm not done with it yet. And he said, yeah, you are. It's 110,000 words. We got to stop it there. So then I had to write the sequel to it, Throw Out the Water, which tells from 1933 to 38 everything that happened. Those books also have the Heron Massacre, because people moved to Christian County from the Cherry Mine disaster in 1909, and from West Virginia and Ludlow and all those places, because we had good wages and working conditions. So, Throw Out the Water, the reason for that title is coal miners back in those days had dinner buckets. You ever seen those silver dinner buckets? And if they got mad at the boss, they would take their dinner bucket and had water in the bottom of it that kept the food cool. They'd take the food out and they'd walk up to their boss and they'd throw the water at his feet. And the expression was, if the water stays in the air, we'll go back to work. But if it falls to the ground, we go on wildcat strike. So you can imagine it fell to the ground, they went on a lot of wildcat strikes. Well, that's what throw out the water is about. That guy's telling a story. I didn't know they were going.
And the top was.
Cut him out of there. Now, the next thing was people started asking me questions about things that happened in 16 tons. One of the stories was about Pana, Illinois. That's how the book starts, with a true life massacre that happened up on Williamsburg Hill by Pana in 1898. And they said, we want to know more about that. So I wrote the book, Sundown Town. Let's see if it's on here. Sundown Town tells the true story of what happened in Pana, Illinois, and Verdon and Carterville in 1898-99. 1,000 blacks were brought into Pana, and blacks were brought into Carterville and Verdon, and they were used as strike breakers. But the United Mine Workers didn't like it. So they had major gun battles. People didn't know that in Pana they had major gun battles for 11 months. And finally the blacks had to leave. Well, to write the book, I had to write about what the blacks were thinking back in those days. And I didn't know what they were thinking, so I talked to this guy, Doug King. He's the founder and president of the African American Museum in Springfield, and he helped me get into the heads of what the blacks were thinking. All right? Now, another story that was in 16 tons was the true story of Kincaid, Illinois in 1925. The Shelton brothers came up there and they robbed the bank, tried to get the coal miners' payroll. And when they robbed the bank, they grabbed the hostage from one of the tellers. They grabbed the money, and they were making their getaway. And you know what happened? Everybody in Kincaid came out of their houses and started shooting at them. And they dropped the money. Two of them got shot. Carl and Earl got shot, and they got away. Well, you see, that's in 16 tons in one chapter. And the kids said, we want to know more about that. So then I had to write the book. See how all this fits in? 13 Steps for Charlie Berger. And this tells the story of Charlie Berger and the Shelton gang and how they were bootleggers in this area, as you guys all know, I'm sure. And they were fighting a major war against the Ku Klux Klan. Now, some of you might think, oh, these Ku Klux Klan, we know what they're like, they're terrible and things. You know what, though? They're different back then. My granddad told me when he was 84 years old, he said, I was in the Ku Klux Klan. I said, Granddad, you always told me not to be prejudiced. You didn't like black people? He said, oh no, I never met a black person. We didn't like those dang Catholics. I said, why don't you like Catholics? And he said, because they believed in drinking and gambling, and we don't believe that, us Baptists. So like 20,000 people joined the Ku Klux Klan in southern Illinois to get rid of, to enforce prohibition. That makes sense? And so Berger and Shelton at first got together, and they're fighting these major gun battles, as most of you know, right there in Heron, Illinois, and all around this area. Well, they finally beat the Ku Klux Klan. Glenn Young was their leader. And I got, there's Charlie. Let me show you. You guys have all seen these, right? I imagine you have. If not, I'm trying to get this put on, have a documentary made so you can see pictures of them. But Glenn Young was the leader of the Ku Klux Klan, and he's buried out here at Heron Cemetery, and so are a lot of the Sheltons and other people. But anyway, they finally beat the Ku Klux Klan. Well, now the question was, who's going to take over, the Bergers or the Sheltons? So they started fighting each other. And does everybody know those stories? You guys are from down here, you better know your local history stories. If you don't, I can tell you. You know that one of the Charlie Berger's friend, Ora Thomas, in this picture, got in a gunfight with Glenn Young over here in Heron, and they killed each other. And then the Ku Klux Klan had a big funeral here in Heron, if you can see that, and some of them dressed, and then you had the big tornado that came through here, killed 600 and some people. I'm skipping through these because I know we don't have much time with this thing, but you know they used a tank. The Shelton gang built a tank and went through the country and were shooting at the Berger boys, right? And so then Charlie Berger decided to make his own little armored car, and he went and blew up a few of the Shelton places. Now you might ask what they were fighting over. Well, somebody who's from Shawneetown? Anybody? Helen Holbrook? Well, they were fighting over a girl, partly. Of course, the major part was other things, but they were fighting over a girl named Helen Holbrook. I got a picture of her somewhere, but I don't think it's on this thing. She's a beautiful young girl from Shawneetown, and she liked gangsters. So she dated Berger and Sheldon. John Musgrave from down around this area, who you might know has the IllinoisHistory.com and all those books. I'm going to have lunch with him here pretty soon. He said that one day Charlie Berger walked in on Carl with Helen. And that didn't go over real well. So anyway, that's what my book, 13 Steps for Charlie Berger, is about. And then we get into how he had Joe Adams killed, the mayor of West City, and then he dies in 13 Steps for Charlie Berger. This is a picture of Charlie walking up the step, or walking out to his execution with the rabbi. I was lucky enough to get in touch with the rabbis over in St. Louis, where this rabbi came from, and learned a little bit about him. And Charlie had a picture taken of him and his family the night before, or the few days before he was executed. That's a famous picture you might have seen. You can see it. If you haven't been there, go over to Benton, to that museum, and you can see the gallows where Charlie was hung. It's a replica, but they got the original gallows inside. And the night before he was executed, this picture was taken. And one of the interesting things, if you look, he's got his ring finger off his left hand gone. The stories where he got shot off, but based on what I saw, it might have been got infection from a fist fight he was in. This guy's interesting. This is Phil Hanna, the hangman, the humane hangman who hung Charlie Berger and a lot of other people. In my research, one of the things I found out was that Phil Hanna did over 70 hangings, and some of them were not publicized. In my new book, Bootlegger Heaven, which is about the Shelton gang, Black Charlie Harris, who winds up killing a lot of the Sheltons in the book and in real life, put in Leavenworth. And in Leavenworth, there was a terrible guy named Carl Panzram, who was a prisoner, who went off and killed a bunch of people. They made a movie about him. You know the movie? Ever heard of anybody? Can't think of the name of it. But anyway, he was mean. He killed like 22 men and bragged that he raped over 1,000 men. And so they executed him in Leavenworth, and I'm pretty sure this guy was the hangman, based on the research I did. And I was able to get in touch with Ken LeMaster, who has written many novels, or many things about Leavenworth. He's a Leavenworth historian. So he helped me with those parts. Now at this point, I want to tell you that everything in all my books, all the events are true that I can come up with. All right? It took a lot of research, but other people had done the research. I'm not going to take credit for that. I found out a few interesting things that are unique. But Taylor Pincinel, if you want to really know what happened, read his books, Brothers Notorious and Black Charlie Harris, called Dapper and Deadly. Read John Musgrave's books on Illinois history. So the question I want to answer right now is, why do I write novels? You might be asking that. I've got a master's degree. Why aren't you writing academic books? The reason is I wanted to inspire young people who won't pick up an academic book. I was a storyteller when I taught. My kids liked the stories I told in history. I made everything a story, so they would remember it. That's why all my books start off with the Rudyard Kipling line, if history were written in the form of stories, it would never be forgotten. And I get people to read this that are younger. They will read novels. And then they go off and you can find, I list in my books all the research I've done, where the books are, where you can find them. And then at the end of these last two books, I have written the events. Okay? So you can see what is actually true in them. In Bootlegger Heaven, I changed the order of a couple of things for dramatic effect. Now, the last thing I'll say is that it's going to be a movie. Yeah, it's not a promised thing yet, but Taylor Pinsnell has told us that he had a contract with Art and Entertainment and History Channel to have a movie made about the Birger Shelton stories. But that contract expired, and he doesn't know if it's going to get picked up. I also, last year, when this 13 Steps came out, a guy from Benton, who's a Hollywood producer named Ben Moses, contacted me, and he came down and spent 3 days with me looking at the idea of the production of a story about this. All right, wonderful guy. We got along really good. I met his wife and daughter, and we went out several times with John Musgrave, and he talked to Taylor Pinsnell. So he's interested, but there's a couple of problems. That was right before COVID. And then unfortunately, a month later, his daughter got hit by a car and was killed. And then I talked to him recently. In fact, I just was published in this magazine, Garrison, which is found at some Barnes and Nobles and places. And it comes out quarterly, and they did a publication that I wrote on, I call it Moonshine Empire, but it's the story of Charlie Berger and the Shelton gang. So in it, I quote Ben Moses talking about wanting to make it a movie. All right? And the thing is, he's going to have to get help. One of the people we're trying to get help from is, what's his name now? Come on, the actor from Benton. John Malkovich. John Malkovich would love, I'm sure, if he had the information, love to be part of this. And over in Benton, one of the librarians is a relation to his, and we've been trying to get communication to him to see if he'd be interested. I think he would make a great Phil Hanna. I could see him playing that part. And one of the things I got somebody really mad at me one day during the presentation because he was a Phil Hanna fan. He said Phil Hanna only executed people because he wanted it to be humane. He was called the humane hangman. But you know what I think? I thought, wait a minute. After every hanging, he wanted something personal from the hanging. Now, what does that sound like to you? Huh? I said, that sounded maybe like a serial killer who likes to keep something from every hanging. He sometimes did murder weapons or the rope or whatever. And anyway, that person got mad at me and said, no, he did it because he was a nice guy. And I said, well, maybe. Maybe it was the perfect job for a serial killer. So John Malkovich could play it that way. How's that? Oh, yeah. Now, am I about out of time?
You are absolutely fine. You can keep going.
I can go forever. That's the trouble.
Normally our brown bags runs from 12 to 1.
Okay.
So if you want to talk about we weren't expecting you to have your new book, right?
Yeah, I've got, here's the deal on, just so you know now, I said I don't try to make money on these, and I know you're mad at me for that, but I've gotten our teacher retirement, and I want to get people to read these books, and if they're not good, then don't tell anybody. But if they're good, leave a review on Amazon. That really helps us sell the books. All right? But I sell, through my publisher, he published 16 tons and Throw Out the Water, and they cost me $10. The other books cost me $6, and they sell for $15 on Amazon. But I can sell them to people for as low as $6. if you want Sundown Town, 13 Steps, and Bootlegger Heaven. But don't tell everybody that, because then I'll be bombarded at my door, which I have. I've had a lot of people come. But 13 Steps and Bootlegger Heaven, of course, is a sequel, because it ends with Charlie Berger getting hung, and then Bootlegger Heaven picks up right from there and goes all the way through the 1940s to where the Sheltons are executed. All right, and I ordered copies, but unfortunately I won't have mine till September 1st. So I have 5 proof copies back there that I can sell for $6, which is what I paid for them. Now, a proof, if you don't know what a proof copy is, when you you first put it in print, they send you a copy and you decide if it looks okay, if there's any problems. Well, I read through it and I found 2 problems. One was that somehow Lula Shelton's name got transferred to Lulu. So in that version, it's spelled L-U-L-U, Shelton. And if you know who the Sheltons are, all of them. But the other thing was, I originally had the book called Moonshine Empire, but now it's called Bootlegger Heaven. Okay? I can take a few questions if you've got them, or I can tell you some more about each thing. Do you have any comments or questions? If you don't, that's okay. I got plenty of other things to tell you.
I didn't know about this Christian deal.
Christian County?
No.
The Ku Klux Klan?
Mhm.
I didn't know that either.
Yeah.
So what, was there a transition at some point to where they were just criminals?
Who's that?
Well,
The Ku Klux Klan, you mean?
yeah.
All right, yeah, the Ku Klux Klan, and then what happened, I'll start at the beginning. I've got even some pictures on it and things. But a movie came out that you might have heard of. If you haven't seen it, you might want to watch it. It's called, let's see if I have a picture of it. There it is. Birth of a Nation, 1915, a silent movie. When it came out, G.W. Griffith D.W. Griffith was a real bad racist, and he made this movie to show that the slavery was good. The blacks are just too dumb to be any good at all, and believe it or not, it was showed in the White House to Woodrow Wilson. A lot of you may not know this. You know, Woodrow Wilson was an extreme racist. He did not think blacks were equal to whites in any way. And that's one of the things when they talk about critical race theory, which I really don't go with all that stuff that they got now. There is some merit to a few of the things in our history that we probably need to make sure we kids know, is that Woodrow Wilson was a racist, did a lot of other good things, but this movie is called the most influential movie in American history. Because even though cinematically, it's a masterpiece. It's one of the few times when they had many different cameras set up when they were doing a film. They had gunfights and battles and things that were really good. The story is interesting, but the Ku Klux Klan are the heroes in it. After the Civil War. The movie set after the Civil War. Well, Woodrow Wilson himself called it a masterpiece, said it was a wonderful movie. He agreed with everything about it. They got him quoted in the movie throughout it. It's on YouTube if you want to watch it. Just type in Birth of a Nation, although there is a new one that was made that is anti-racist. But it's a silent movie, and it started the second coming of the Ku Klux Klan in 1915. Right here in this town, when they showed this movie, there would be people who would dress up in Ku Klux Klan costumes and ride their horses down the road. I guarantee they did it right here in Harrisburg. And they would yell at people, Birth of a Nation's playing, everybody go down to the theater and watch it. And everybody was coming in and watching it. Well, in the beginning of 13 Steps for Charlie Berger, I have Glenn Young, the Sheltons, and Ora Thomas watching Birth of a Nation. Okay, that's how I begin it, because that was the beginning of the Ku Klux Klan. Now, Glenn Young, who became the leader, was brought in. He was a violent guy. He claimed to have killed over 22 men. But yeah, they were big all through this area. And they had made, the National Guard got called into Heron several times because of the gunfights between the Ku Klux Klan and the Berger and Shelton gangs. Okay? Any other questions on any of that? Good. Well, I can tell you a few other things then. Glenn Young and his wife Maud got in their car one day in May 23rd, 1924, and he was basically getting kicked out of the Ku Klux Klan because he was too mean. And they got in a car, and he stood up on that rail right there of that car, a Lincoln, and he told everybody, had thousands of people there, Ku Klux Klan members. He said, I'm going to St. Louis to clean it up like I did Little Egypt. And so they got in their car, and they're driving down the country road over by Kaskaskia Valley. And the Shelton brothers, along with Ora Thomas, probably Ora Thomas, drove up beside him and started shooting at him with machine guns and shotguns. Glenn Young drove off into the ditch. He jumped out of the car. He got underneath it and shooting back at him. Well, his wife Maud caught a shot right in the face. She survived it, but she was blind for the rest of her life. Here's a picture of Glenn in the hospital after the shooting. That's the car they were in. And that's a picture of his wife that was taken by the Ku Klux Klan and used as publicity to get people to want to join the Ku Klux Klan and to see how bad the gamblers, the prohibition, the bootleggers were. All right. That's why Ora Thomas, he was deputized, and most of the sheriffs, of course, you know, were on the side of one or the other, or both. And the sheriff was on the side of the bootleggers, and he made Ora Thomas a deputy, and that's why Ora Thomas probably was set up by Charlie Berger, and Charlie Berger got him to go to this cigar store in Heron, and that's right after the gunfight. And when they walked in to shoot, Glenn Young was being accused of being at the Heron Massacre. You guys all know what the Heron Massacre was? If you don't, I'll tell you real quickly, because the United Mine Workers surrounded a mine in Heron, and they made 50 men surrender. And then they walked them down the railroad and started shooting them. They killed 19 men, took their bodies into Heron to a cemetery. That's where they're buried. And just a few years ago, a guy named Scott Doody and some archaeologists and things found the bodies in Heron in a potter's field and reburied them with dignity. But they were getting ready to bury people over them. Okay? Well, Glenn Young was probably there. Glenn Young was probably one of the men protecting the strike breakers. All right? Ora Thomas was on the side of the United Mine Workers, you see. And so one day, Ora Thomas walks into this cigar store and somebody's yelling at Glenn Young, you were at Heron, you're the cause for all that, those 19 men dying. And Glenn Young said, no, I wasn't. And Ora Thomas walked in with his hands in his overcoat pocket and said, yeah, you were. And Glenn Young said, don't draw those guns. Well, Ora Thomas went like that, shot through his pockets, hit Glenn Young. Glenn Young grabbed his holsters and shot through his holsters. He was falling backwards and hit Ora Thomas. Both of them went in the hospital. Glenn Young's wife might have been by his side, blind, and she's holding his hand when he died. And then when he died, the Ku Klux Klan, who were protecting the hospital from anybody else coming in, went into Ora Thomas's room and beat him to death. And they say that Ora Thomas's last words were, did I get Glenn Young? And they said, yeah, you killed him. And then they beat him to death. And And that's the funeral, the Ku Klux Klan there, happened right there in Heron. See, when you ask me one simple question, I talk for 20 minutes. There's the National Guard, came in during this. Oh, I don't have it on the right setting there, but that's all right. Now, any other question right now? Because I'll go into the tornado. See, the tornadoes happened soon after it. Charlie Berger was actually in Danville jail at the time of the big tornado, the tri-state tornado, that 2 mile wide, supposedly. There might have been 2 or 3 tornadoes separating at times, that came through southern Illinois and killed 695 people or something like that. And worst tornado in American history. And Charlie Berger was in jail, and he asked the sheriff, he said, can I get out for a while? I think my wife might have been there. Well, his wife was mad at him. She was trying to get away from him. So she had left, and he didn't know where she was, but she was probably in Pennsylvania. But anyway, they let him out of jail to go check on his wife, and then he brought his 2 girls back to Danville. And by the way, while he was in Danville, he was just treated like a god. The deputies gave up their workroom for his to have a private room. They brought in prostitutes for him. That's when he got addicted to morphine properly. They brought in drugs. He was just treated like a hero because he was a bootlegger. And most of them liked their alcohol. All right, so the tornado came through, and Murfreesboro and all these towns through this area were just about flattened. And in my book, I have Carl and, I gotta turn that thing off. I got Carl and Charlie there. I made that part up completely. I guess I should tell you that some of the things in here I make up because I knew Charlie got out of jail and went down to check it. So I have him going there to check it and running into Carl. And that just happened to be about the same time that they had a big disagreement in a bar and had a fist fight. Okay, so I put things together. You see what I'm saying? To try to make it interesting. And so again, the actual order of events are in the back of the book. And if you think, well, wait a minute, that didn't happen then. No, it didn't. But Corey did it for dramatic effect. Okay, you can do that when you're telling a story. But what's interesting about this tornado was, afterwards, a preacher came to town named Williams. He came to Little Egypt, and he went to all the towns around here, and he preached the gospel, and everybody was there because they thought the thumb of God had ripped through Illinois and killed all those people in the tornado. They were upset because of all the gunfights that were happening. And so he converted tens of thousands of people. And Carl Shelton came back. He was out of state, and when he got there, he saw all these happy people that had found God. So he had to destroy that, didn't he? So he sent his prostitutes out on the street and had them seduce some guys, and he lowered the price of whiskey. You got the first glass for free in his roadhouses, and he was able to bring people back to his flock. But it's interesting. I have a friend, Nathan Shanks, who was a state policeman up in Taylorville, and he said his grandfather was one of the men that was saved during that time, and Nathan to this day is also a strong Christian. Okay. Doing okay?
Yeah.
Well, right after that following year, the election day gunfight happened. This is where the last time that the Sheltons and the Bergers were together, because the Ku Klux Klan wanted to win this election. See, Glenn Young was dead. They lost all sorts of people in gunfights and things, and they were losing. And so they wanted to win this election, what date there? April 13th, 1926. So they had their Ku Klux Klan riding in cars down the street trying to keep Baptists from voting. And so Charlie Berger and the Sheltons were riding down the street with their guns trying to keep the Catholics from voting. And they had all sorts of clashes. Gary Janelle writes a really interesting story in his book. Gary Janelle's from down around here, and he says that a Catholic nun brought a bunch of people in the boat, and the bootleggers and the Catholics started fighting each other. The Ku Klux Klan started a fist fight, so she just walked over and started filling out ballots. Vote for her people. But there was 6 people killed that day in those gunfights. Charlie Berger was probably there himself, shooting. Some people think. Carl was back sitting in his car, directing everything and saying, "Go down this street. I heard the Catholics over there. Go over there and fight them." All right. Oh, that's the car that Charlie Briggs and Ora Treadway was one of Charlie's best friends, Charlie Berger's best friends. They were in that car when they were ambushed by the Ku Klux Klan on that day during the election, and they were both killed. And that's the car from one of the shootings I've been telling you about. Can you guys see these very good? Okay. Art and Bessie Newman are interesting characters. They're the ones who were ambushed by the Shelton tank out on a country road one day. And she got shot in the leg, and he got shot a couple of times, but they lived. Art had originally helped the Sheltons get started in East St. Louis. And then they got mad at him, and so he went over to Charlie Berger's side and fought with Charlie. Oh, I'll tell you one other thing that I discovered that people don't know from around here. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre in Chicago in 1929. You guys heard of that? Mm-hmm. All right, Al Capone sent some men in to kill Bugsy Moran, but Bugsy wasn't there, and they killed 7 other men in that garage, and it's in all the movies and stuff. Well, I found out that Fred Burke from Southern Illinois, and Gus Winkler, and several others, Bryce Benton, they were all from Southern Illinois. They had been, some of them, in the Shelton and Berger gangs. And they had kidnapped one of Al Capone's men accidentally. And when Al Capone found out, they thought, oh boy, he's going to kill us. Al Capone invited them to dinner. Fred Burke and Gus Winkler and them all went to dinner with Al Capone, and Al Capone liked them. And he called them his American boys, because they weren't Italian. And he made his American boys his hitmen. He sent them to New York to kill Frankie Yale, and then he sent them on St. Valentine's Day to do the shooting that was there. There's interesting things like Gus Winkler, who drove the car at the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. He was just a driver. He had been a driver in World War I and was used to weaving in and out of guns and things. So they liked him as the getaway man in bank robberies and things. But Fred Burke was called Killer Burke. And they were from Southern Illinois. And the gun, the Tommy gun that Fred Burke used, he used it in Detroit in a killing, and in New York in a killing of Frankie Yale, and then in St. Valentine's Day Massacre. And they didn't know that until about 10 years ago when they took the bullets and checked them, forensics, and found out that it was the same gun. That gun is now up in Wisconsin in a police station, and it's famous. All right? So that's another thing I found. I actually thought my next book should be The American Boys. And tell the story of how those guys were in and Fred Burke's they're in my book, in my new one, Bootlegger Heaven. If you have anything to say or anything, just let me know. You keep an eye on the clock. You guys know Shady Rest, right? You know, anybody who doesn't know Shady Rest? You all know. I wish it was still. I'm going to criticize you guys. You're all from around here. I'm going to tell you, I'm mad at all of you. I'm mad. You tell your city council I'm mad at them, and your mayor, and everybody. Why aren't you making more of this story than you have? When they had this bar down here called Southern Outlaws that went out of business, I was mad at that guy. I went in, he sold 20 of my books, 13 Steps, in a month he was open. But he had pictures of the Sheltons all over it. And I said, why don't you call it Charlie Berger's Shady Rest? Why aren't you guys, you should have a street called Helen Holbrook Road. You should have, you should take advantage of some of this history you've got. And I know that they had some tours here for a while that came out of Marion. And you guys need to get that ready, because it's when this movie comes out, and I think it will. I think when the movie comes out, everybody's going to want to come and see these places. Harrisburg was Charlie Berger's home, for goodness sake. You know, I tell in the story how he would walk around with a pocket full of coins and hand it out to kids in Harrisburg. He paid for everything in $2 bills, right? In fact, if you go in the museum down in Benton, you'll see a thing there. It's just full of $2 bills. Let me see. He walked around at night. He drove around midnight at nighttime, and he would leave a sack of groceries and coal on people's houses in Harrisburg. Of course, that's the famous picture that I think needs to be done more with. You know, they were going to make a movie with Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin. Did I say that already?
No.
Back in the 60s, they were going to make a Charlie Berger and Shelton Gang movie with Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, and the Rat Pack. And instead, they got the script for Ocean's 11 and Robin and the Seven Hoods, and they did those. But they were actually going to do it, and I tell about it in here. Yes?
I want to tell you a story about my mother.
Go for it.
And Charlie Berger. She grew up on Main Street, and half a block down the street was a little grocery store. And one day, they let her walk down to the grocery store to get some things. She was about 5 years old. And when she was carrying her groceries up the hill back home, and Charlie Berger pulled up in his car and got out and didn't just pick up the groceries, he picked her up and carried her all the way up to her house, and he knew who she was.
Right.
And the housekeeper looked out and saw him bringing her home and nearly had a heart attack. So
Both the Sheltons and the Bergers like to be the good guys. He kept crime out of Harrisburg. You know about that? He had a guy, a kid one day who tried to rob the postmaster, and he accidentally and after he robbed him, he got scared. He thought, uh-oh, he recognized me. He might tell. So the boy, who was 16 or 18, goes into the post guy's house and kills him at night and gets thrown in jail a few days later. And guess who's sitting in the cell smoking a cigarette? Charlie Berger. And Charlie's sitting there smoking, and the boy named Joe says, what are you doing in here, Charlie? He said, oh, I just pay my yearly tribute to the sheriff. I let him arrest me once in a while. And he said, I heard you just killed somebody. Joe Chestnut says, yeah, I didn't want to talk about that. He said, oh, you can tell me, I've killed more men than you. And so they start talking, and the boy tells him everything about killing the postmaster guy in Harrisburg. A few minutes, what?
I wonder who that was.
Joe Chestnut was the killer.
But who was the postmaster?
I got his name. It's in my book. You have
Okay.
to buy the book.
Okay.
And yeah, it's in Bootlegger Heaven.
Okay.
And Charlie, oh, maybe it's in the other one. It's in 13 Steps. There's plenty of them. But Charlie, then the deputy comes and said, Charlie, the sheriff wants to talk to you. Charlie goes in there, puts his feet up on the desk. Sheriff hands him whiskey. The other guy hands him a cigar. And Charlie tells him everything they know about Joe Chestnut. A few weeks later, Joe Chestnut's hung for that murder. So Charlie squealed on him, you see. Now, the Sheltons were different. They were family-oriented. All right? There's Lula over here. She was young and pretty. May not look so good in that with those haircuts. And Hazel over here. Paul and Ma. Ma never did believe the Sheltons were bad boys. But Paul tried to tell her. tried to tell her that they were no good. And then back here we got Bernie, who was the killer. He was the worst. And then Dalta's, I'm sure you guys have heard of Ruthie Shelton. She's been around here. She found out in 2004 that her Dalta's son Earl was her dad, and Dalta's son was on his deathbed in 2004, and Ruthie Shelton kept hearing him when he was hallucinating saying, "Did you kill him? Well, kill him, take the money, run." And when he recovered, she said, "Why, Dad, why were you saying all that?" He said, "Well, I've never told you, but I might as well. I was a member of the Shelton gang." He's in my book, young Earl, little Earl Shelton. And little Earl, she'd never heard of the Shelton gang. So she didn't know that Taylor Pincinel had written a book about it. So she got the books, Gary DeNeal and Taylor, and read them and started studying it. And then she wrote her own book called Inside the Shelton Gang, her daughter's experience. You guys have that book? Have you had her?
We might.
She can't come and speak right now because her husband's sick. They live in Jacksonville. But see, the Sheltons at the end of my book are going to get in a car and drive to Jacksonville, Florida, and that's where they hid out for the next 100 years. Because Black Charlie was killing all of them. And her whole life, they were never allowed to go a lot of places in public, all the way up till the end of the 1900s. And they were all taught how to use guns. Guns were just part of the family. And she never knew why it was like that. But that she just thought that's the way it was for everybody. And then she has gone around Illinois speaking. She wrote the book with John Musgrave.
We do have it.
You do have it.
We have
yeah.
several by her.
Yeah, you probably do. She spoke a lot. Here's Earl. He was the amiable one. He was really nice. Everybody liked him, but he could kill too. And then Carl and Roy. Now, which one of them's Black Charlie Harris probably killed Roy while he was riding. He had been in prison his whole life. He wasn't even part of the gang. He was just riding a tractor one day in a field, and probably Black Charlie Harris shot him and then let the tractor run over him, the plows, to kill him. And then Carl was killed out here in Little Egypt by Fairfield on Pond Creek Road. He was ambushed. Earl was shot a couple of times, probably by Black Charlie, but he survived. He lived to be like 90 or 80, 96 years old. I tell at the end of the book. And then Bernie got killed up in a bar in Peoria. He was going into the bar or coming out, probably coming out, and Black Charlie Harris, I've been to the bar. It's called the Shelton Bar, Shelton Tavern. It's still there in Peoria. I was just there a few weeks ago, and they're selling my books. And there's a big hill all around it, up and then a cemetery up on top. And Black Charlie Harris probably parked in the cemetery, walked down the hill, and shot Bernie. And then Bernie tried to crawl into the tavern that probably had one more drink.
Why was Blackie Harris? Is he a straight man? Good
Okay,
man?
yeah. Now he's a big part of the story. Black Charlie Harris was in the Shelton gang
That's what I thought.
for a while, but the Sheltons used him. Black Charlie Harris had to go up to Detroit and was buying whiskey for the Sheltons, and Carl gave him some counterfeit bills, and then he got put in prison for counterfeit bills. So a lot of my story is centered in Leavenworth, Kansas, in a prison. And that's why Ken LeMaster helped me with it, to understand what it was like. You wouldn't believe what it was like, all right? And so Black Charlie Harris came out of there mad. Also, Buster Workman is a good one to study. He wound up winning the whole gangster activity in St. Louis. If you wanted to see Buster Workman's house, he was with the Sheltons too, and they betrayed him. But he had a house there in what's it called? Not Carlinville, Collinsville. And he built a moat around his house for protection. And he's got a house in the middle of it and had full of guns and stuff. But anyway, the Sheltons betrayed a few people, and they're the ones who wanted him killed. Did that answer your question?
That answered my question.
Okay. How are we doing?
It's about 10 till 1.
Okay. Well, I'm still going strong. You have any other comments or questions on that? Well, I might have a picture of Black Charlie I'll get to in a minute. Oh, here's one I found out. Taylor Penson told me this one. All right. This one's an interesting picture because it's Carl Shelton sitting at a piano. By the way, you know, the Sheltons went to church religiously, Methodist Church in Fairfield. Carl actually taught Sunday school and played the organ. And here's a picture of him sitting at the piano with his wife and his girlfriend. Yeah. That's what Taylor Penson told me. There's Earl, who got shot several times and survived. There's Bernie. Let's see, there's the Heron Massacre. Let's see if I got a picture of Black Charlie. Yeah, Taylor's book, Dapper and Deadly, is really a good book about Black Charlie Harris. You know about the plane bombing. Shady Rest, the Sheltons couldn't get to Shady Rest because it was back in the woods, which is what Charlie intended. But then they hired an airplane. An airplane, World War I airplane in 1926, landed in Benton. They kidnapped the pilots and made one of them fly over the Shady Rest, and they dropped bombs on it. Now, some people around here, you guys don't know your history very good. Some people said that that was the first aerial bombing in the United States. No, there were two others before it. That one was in Tulsa during the major Tulsa massacre, and then another one in 1922 up on Blair Mountain after Sid Hatfield. That's a great story. That's in which one is it? I can't remember which book. 16 Tons. Sid Hatfield is a guy who stood in the street with two guns blazing and shot it out with the Baldwin Phelps detectives in Mate 1. And when the smoke cleared, 9 of them were dead, and he was still standing. And anyway,
it makes a good copy to save it for first bombing.
what's that?
It
Makes good.
makes a good copy to save
Yeah,
it for first
yeah.
bombing.
But I know of at least two others besides that where they were dropped on American citizens. There's one of the unexploded bombs that was dropped on the Shady Rest. These two guys are really interesting. I might probably missed something there, but
Oh, yeah, that's the guy that went down the bomb, at the mine shaft down there, wasn't
they threw his body.
he? In the mine shaft, didn't he?
Well, he got thrown out in the woods, is what I understand. But he was eaten up by animals. His beautiful wife, Lori, what happened was, let me get this straight now. The Berger gang got mad at Lori Price because they thought he was going to tell on him about Charlie's murders. So he was a state policeman, and he made lots of money because the Sheltons, the Bergers would steal a car and then use it for robberies and stuff, and then they'd leave it out on a road. And this guy, Lori Price, was told where the car was by the Bergers. He would pick up the car and get the reward. And the state's attorney also was in on it, and the three of them would split it, the Bergers, the Lori Price, and them. But so he was kind of friends with them. But when Charlie decided he needed to be killed, Charlie snuck into their bedroom at night and kidnapped them, took them to Shady Rest, which had been burnt by then, and they shot Lori, and Charlie said, put him in the car. He's got a gut shot, so he's dying slow. They put him in the car, and Charlie sat on top of him and took him out in the country to kill him. 3 of Charlie's men took Ethel Price to Collinsville, to a mine, coal mine, that's what you were thinking of, and raped her, and then threw her body down in the mine shaft after killing her. I put that in the book about the rape because I called up her grandson, and I said, I need to know what happened. I think it was the grandson and grandnephew. And he said, yeah, we were always told that they raped her first, and she was pregnant.
Wow.
And then they killed her and threw her body down. They found both bodies, and by then Charlie was already going to be hung for Joe Adams' murder. Okay, does that help? Any? Now, I'm about ready to end it here. I want you to go over to the Benton Museum. You can find these weapons were taken off Charlie when he was arrested. That's his Tommy gun that they've got on display there, Charlie Berger's Tommy gun, that he was allowed to keep in a jail cell with him when he was arrested. Because he was afraid he gave himself up on the condition that he could keep the gun in the cell with him for protection from the gangs, from the Sheltons. And then there he is walking to the, you'll see that if you go there. That's a dummy standing on the wall. And then he goes to the, look at that guy up in the tree. There were 500 people in the courtyard watching him get hung. And some people climbed up in the tree. Now, how that guy got up in that thin of branches in that tree, I don't know. And then there's Charlie Bottom walking up to Phil Hanna. He shakes hands with Phil Hanna and says, "You're a good old boy." Smiles at everybody. His last words, "It is a beautiful world." All right.
Good.
You know what? I'm going to put on this thing. This is Bobby Clark singing, and afterwards the Woodbox Gang. Woodbox Gang has Gary DeNeal's children as singers, Brian DeNeal and you DeNeal. Yeah, you've become a friend of mine too. All right? That's it.
Well, I would like to extend a thank you from everyone that has attended today and from the library staff and the library board. And just a quick note to let you all know that next month, Wednesday, September 22nd, I will be the brown bag reviewer for the month. And I'm following Mr. Corley because I will be doing a fictionalized story of one of the first women serial killers in the country. Her name was Belle Guinness, and she moved here from Norway and moved up to Chicago. And so the book that I will be reviewing is called In the Garden of Spite. So we do have that upstairs, but thank you, Mr. Corley. I really enjoyed this. I do love the history and the true crime. So great discussion today.